Our final speaker is Miles Aiello, and I'm just going to speak a little bit about climate change for a second while Miles is standing next to me, because I just wanted to say this. If you were to look at a map, countries, to see where the social cost of carbon, a metric for where climate change impacts are worse, you would probably find that countries like Canada, Northern Europe, probably a lower social cost of carbon on a country level than a country like India. India is a poorer country per capita than a country like, say, Sweden. So you find between nations, you find disparate impacts in terms of climate change. You look at the United States, you could take a state like Alabama, compare it to, say, San Diego County. What is the change in GDP that's going to occur as a result of climate change in this area? You're going to find that areas that are already in the United States that are relatively poor experience climate change consequences worse and experience them faster. You can go within that state, within that county, and compare deciles of earnings per year, right? And the poor people in those counties are impacted more. Climate change is already having tremendous impacts on the developing world, where most people, approaching 99% of people, do not have insurance. I've seen disparate climate change impacts in my own life with Hurricane Sandy on the Jersey Shore. People I know, love, and care about, who were wealthy, didn't suffer so much, who were poor that I cared about, suffered a lot. It's hard to see, it's hard to experience. I was 6 weeks into a PhD program when that happened, seeing my hometown destroyed. Big impacts. These policies we talk about, all this stuff we do, we need to transform the society, but we're transforming it in a way that promotes equity and elevates us all by lifting the people most impacted by this terrible problem out of the way and out of that risk profile. And all climate change policy needs to have foremost in our minds, how do we help those among us who are the most vulnerable? And Miles has been absolutely steadfast in advancing a message that we need to think of climate change as the existential threat that it is, and that it is a social justice issue, and it is really a social justice issue of our time. And I definitely appreciate Miles's dedication to this cause and really clear, steady belief system. And Miles, send us off with an excellent presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Corey. Appreciate you, all your commitment and leadership this year has been phenomenal. And so as the last speaker, it was an honor and privilege to watch everyone. Fantastic job. I enjoyed this year with you and ready to bring us home here. And so my project for my capstone project is titled Milan Creek Restoration and Recreational Trail. This is a very critical graph here, and I wanted to start off because it really illustrates the severity of the issue. And I think Corey made a great point right now in just highlighting the severity of the issue. If we look over here at the year 800,000, we can see from paleoclimatology, the measurement of carbon dioxide in ice cores, we can see that right around here, this natural fluctuation is very normal for the planet from a paleoclimate perspective. What happens here? This is the Industrial Revolution, and we can see this anomaly on the right side of this graph, and this is where we're currently at. And so it really illustrates how abnormal the time that we are experiencing with climate, and it really demands big structural institutional change to meet the severity of the crisis. And that happens at the federal level, that happens at the state level, and that happens at the local level. For my project, I decided to concentrate on that change at the local level. And this is Milan Creek, and my project is looking at repurposing and revitalizing the land to improve the environment and the community. First and foremost, it's important to acknowledge the original inhabitants of this land. In the Los Angeles region where this creek is located are the Tongva people. And I thought this quote was very powerful by Julie Bogani, a Tongva elder who recently just passed a couple months ago. She says, Tongva women never left their ancestral land, they just became invisible. How do we make ourselves not invisible? This is the question I ask every day. And I think that's a powerful quote, and I think it also speaks to the idea of indigenous people not being seen. And so my project has a big focus on indigenous co-management and collaboration, because these are the folks who know how to manage the land. They've been doing so for thousands of years. like previous cohort members have said. Quick roadmap of what we're going to cover is my motivation for the project, background, and a historical analysis of the situation, climate change impacts, my proposal, opportunities, constraints, and the paths moving forward. So my motivation, here's a picture of the riverbed creek. This is what it looks like. This is a picture looking at the western side of the creek, and it really gives a good idea of what I'm trying to do. And you can see a service road located on the right-hand side, right over here. There's someone standing in there. Maybe it's me, maybe it's not. It's me. I was in there taking pictures for my capstone project, and it was a lot of fun. So, why this project? This is where I grew up. Actually, just on the previous slide, my parents' house is this one, I believe. So I grew up with this creek behind my house for the last, up until I was 23, and really have seen the ailments that it is and how it's really indicative and represents kind of settler domination on the environment and the idea that we can control nature, right? And really this project, I wanted to serve as a framework that other cities could adapt, kind of like a butterfly effect that could really branch out and cities could use, adapt, and apply to their own riverbeds. And I really liked this idea because it has real tangible outcomes, and that's something that's a big focus for me, is actually being able to take a project, do research, and then create that change, implement that change. Little background on Milan Creek. What is Milan Creek? Milan Creek is a small waterway within the San Gabriel watershed. You can see here, that red dot represents approximately where the creek is located. And it really is a waterway that was important in just being part of the natural environment. And as a consequence of settler colonialism and major historical floods, which I'll talk about, the LA River, in addition to the San Gabriel River, were completely cemented over around the 1950s in collaboration with the Army Corps of Engineers. And so zooming in a bit more, this is the duration of Milan Creek. It starts over here on the eastward side, or actually up creek, and up here, comes down here, and ends and empties into the La Canada tributary, which further connects to Las Coyotes Creek and brings you down to the San Gabriel, emptying into the Pacific Ocean. Here's a drone video that really illustrates kind of the creek, and it is right here. If you follow my cursor, it comes down, passes Imperial. This is the service road that I am recommending to turn into a recreational walking trail while revitalizing the creek, which I'll touch on my proposal in just a bit. But this video really illustrates the perspective of the creek. Shout out to Keanu Munoz for the drone video. Appreciate you. Good, sir. And so really, it's important to understand Milan Creek. This is a space where a lot of mischievous activity has been happening. It's a place where people are constantly breaking into, littering. For example, this picture on the left-hand side, I took about 2 months ago. And, there's a gate. And then the picture on the right, I went back a week later to I wasn't done with my photography. And the creek was broken into, busted into. And, that juxtaposition really illustrates what has been happening here for decades and decades. This is some pollution that the creek experiences. There is a lot of industrial and urban runoff with toxic pesticides. And with an impervious surface, a surface where liquid can't drain into, you really get a lot of toxic pollution that runs off into the ocean. And this is some trash on the right-hand side. Really also the urban heat island effect is prominent here, as there is no vegetation or tree canopy to reflect shortwave radiation from the sun. And so in spaces such as this, we see a dramatic increase in heat up to 5 to 7 degrees that results as a temperature increase from no albedo, no reflectivity from the short wave radiation from the sun. And this is obviously a site where that would potentially occur. And so a historical analysis of the San Gabriel River, which Milan Creek, as I stated, is a small tributary of. Again, I wanted to illustrate this is Tongva land, and the Tongva people were able to live in harmony with the environment for thousands of years because of their admiration and respect for the natural environment. And so much so, when settlers actually first came to the Southern California region, they noted that this space was like a paradise. And that is because of the mutual respect that the Tongva people had in only taking what they needed, respecting the land, the waterways, knowing that in return, these ecosystems would respect them. And so through missionization of Native Americans being subjected to smallpox and being conformed into white society, eventually they gave way due to also the natural environment being degraded from settler colonialism. This leads to Mexico War. It leads to United States getting California, eventually coming into rapid urbanization and flooding in the 19th century. And so, this was a space where really settlers didn't understand the natural flow of the creek. They didn't understand in the winter that it was in the summer that it was arid and dry. In the winter, it flooded very naturally. That was part of the ecosystem. And so this resulted in huge flooding where billions of dollars were caused in damage. Hundreds of lives were lost in the 20th century, early 20th century. And this led to the channelization of the entire, or most of it, San Gabriel and Los Angeles River in the 1950s. You can see here a picture of a historic flood and present day what this system looks like. And so the impacts were a loss of habitat, really up to, this area once spanned 47,000 acres for riparian inhabitants and wetlands, and since the channelization has been subjected to only 2,500 acres left. We have seen a dramatic loss in biodiversity with 160 species threatened and less than 500 steel trout remaining. And a major problem is industrial and urban runoff pollution, which is a big threat and a major concern for cities. And in addition, in the East Fork Valley, we see that over one weekend, 432 gallon bags of trash were found, mainly in the stream bed. And so some different climate change impacts. This is a study done by UCLA that shows, in the years 2040 to 2060, that the region could experience major increase in heat days and an increase of 3 to 5 degrees. And this bar graph illustrates the amount of heat days that could be expected. And so extreme heat days really, again, with the urban heat island effect, potentially exacerbate that condition. The increase of drought, which most recently, as of last week, California is experiencing major issues with drought. And it's also further exacerbates industrial runoff and pollution, as there could be an increase in extreme weather causing more flooding. So my proposal really is focused on reutilizing the space to create a walking trail, and that this would be really doable. It takes trimming the trees, repaving the road, and getting approval from Los Angeles Public Works. The second part would be to rehabilitate the creek, and I'm proposing 3 different options: a full rehabilitation, a partial rehabilitation, and to leave it as is. Full rehabilitation would primarily be removing the hard bottom channel and creating a soft bottom channel, allowing permeation, putting boulders, rocks, and native plants, which would really provide a lot of positive benefits for the community and the environment. A partial rehabilitation would be very similar, but leaving a majority of the cement in the ground, and leaving as is, obviously, would be leaving as is. And so really the question begs is, does the community want this recreational trail? And so I conducted a qualitative study, that's me, and I asked a uniform question: would you like to see a recreational trail built in the riverbed creek behind your home for recreational purposes? I knocked on 221 homes, 112 answered, which is 51% majority of the population. And the results were that 65% of the residents who answered the door want to see a recreational trail built in their backyard. In addition to that, 17% of the households said they were not in favor. 13 said that they were unsure, and there was 4.5% there was a language barrier. Of the 60% that answered the door, which I recall was around 73 homes, I asked a second uniform question, which was, if you were using the trail and you happened to look down at the creek, would you like to see it fully restored, partially restored, or left as is? Of the 73 that answered the door, 60.3% of the residents voted for full rehabilitation, while 19.2% were unsure, 17.8% voted for a partial, and 2.7% want to leave the creek as is. Here's an illustrative rendering done by my good friend and student at Cal Poly Architecture, Eduardo de la Rosa, and he illustrates here what a recreational trail and full rehabilitation could look like. Here's another image that shows what this could look like. Which brings us to the opportunities. There are two primary benefits for the climate and ocean from doing this project. The first one being reducing vehicle miles traveled, and there would be an estimated 26.16 miles saved from each of household within the neighborhood, and this is a calculation I did, which illustrates the amount of vehicle miles traveled over time, which can have an overwhelming amount of greenhouse gas reduction, and this really justifies the creek. And we just heard from several other cohort members that reducing vehicle miles traveled and increasing locality is really important. And also this increases permeability. With the soft bottom channel, we can recharge groundwater, decrease runoff, and create more riparian habitats. And I did a calculation that looked at the total area to remove, and it's 157,000 square feet. Additional opportunities are more green spaces actually increases mental health. Several studies have shown legitimate green spaces tend to decrease criminal activity. It creates new educational opportunities in addition to increasing property value. Decrease in still water creates the probability for less mosquitoes and less mosquito-borne illnesses, and also improves the physical fitness. There are some constraints that are worth mentioning that also came up in my qualitative studies, such as the feasibility to remove concrete, which is contested. The cost, estimated to be around $7 to $9 million in comparison to other similar projects. Risk of increased homelessness. More residents expressing the need to build higher walls. The time to implement, approximately 10 years to design, engineer, and implement. And a lack of privacy that some residents explained. Moving forward, that was a meeting I had with the city manager at La Mirada. Next steps are to submit a proposal to LA Public Works, meet with the community for future planning, work with the Tongva people to establish co-management of the creek, and really organize to win in executing the campaign. Thank you so much to my friends, family, and my Capstone committee for all your support. It's been a journey. Thank you.
Great job, Miles, and thanks for ending on such a strong note. Any questions in the room? Julie?
Miles, can you explain the constraint of increased homelessness, please? I didn't quite get that connection.
Yeah, it's a great question. We've seen a recent rise in homelessness, and this is due for a lot of different socioeconomic factors. We're also experiencing some of the largest wealth inequality we've seen since the 1930s. Riverbeds often provide places where homeless folks can reside, and so some residents express that there might be increased homelessness in Milan Creek should it become developed. However, I argue that putting better gates, more eyes and ears on the trail would actually prevent homeless from being in that space. But great question. Thank you.
Other questions? Michael?
Great job, Miles. Two questions. One is, on the pathway, is that permeable concrete or is that dirt?
It's asphalt, and that walkway is for LA Public Works to access when they periodically clean the creek with a bulldozer, just kind of scraping it along.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And then I think you mentioned to me at some point that this work was attempted in the past, and was it held up because of budget restraints, or what was the opposition then?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Actually, a shout out to Pastor Jack, who's on my Capstone committee, and my father, Tony Aiello, they 10 years ago had this vision. I was very fortunate to be able to bring it to light and even push further in that aspect. They got stuck at, does the community want this? And so I don't know what happened. I was in high school, but you know, I was able to do that qualitative survey and find out the answer, which is overwhelmingly yes, they are in support of it.
Any last questions? So why is the concrete in the riverbed anyway?
Yeah, so the concrete is in the riverbed because of the very natural floods that would occur within the San Gabriel watershed, Los Angeles watershed. And it was an idea to control them. Obviously, they did not think ahead of time and the impacts that would come.
All right. Well, thank you,
Awesome,
Miles.
thank you.